All right, 1 Kings chapter 4. Let's call this one Proven in Spite of Insecurities, because we mentioned but did not talk a lot about the way in which Solomon prayed for wisdom, founded on his realization that he was a young man faced with ruling an entire nation of people, and he felt inadequate for the job, which helps us to understand that sometimes the predicate or the foundation of our success comes in confession, which is one of those things the Bible mentions, but it can be hard to do because confessing can be frightening because it requires us to be vulnerable. And even though in this circumstance, it was just between Solomon and God, sometimes the most difficult confessions to make are to God. And so when Solomon actually prays for wisdom in the previous chapter, he may not have realized the doors he was opening with God, even though the chapter closes with God saying he's going to answer the prayer. I don't think he fully understood why, because in this chapter, we're going to see in the roughly the first half, the text is going to describe Solomon's officials, many of which he's going to be blessed to have held over from trusted friends and counselors in his father's own court. Some of his officials are going to actually marry his own daughters, and he's going to seem to be blessed as a man of wisdom with trustworthy and wise officials around him. And in the second half of the chapter, it's going to describe actually what they were going to do. We've talked about that whole concept of receipts. And the reason why we are talking about this set of lessons from the perspective of proven is what Solomon does is going to outpace many of the things that are said about him. And so we're going to see in the second half of the chapter how three things are going to reflect the way that God proved what he was going to do for Solomon. First and foremost, the people. They're going to stretch from the Euphrates River down to the border of Egypt. And essentially that means Israel's borders expanded under Solomon. Not only that, they had an unprecedented peace, understanding that David fought many of the battles that, as Solomon's going to say in the next chapter, prevented him from being able to build the temple. It's not the only reason, but it's the one that he's going to cite in the next chapter. Those battles that David fought set the context for Solomon not only to have peace, but to expand the boundaries of the nation in peace. Understanding that it's going to say that the people were as many as the sand by the seashore, once again pointing back to the promise that God made through Abraham. And so now we're going to see that they are not only a great people, but the provisions are abundant. And the next section is going to go on to talk about what seems to be the opulent wealth that Solomon sacrificed on a daily basis just to provide for his people. And down from that, we're going to see the wisdom that Solomon had, God quickly fulfilling the promise, not only to make him wise, but making him wiser than anyone else. And he was wise in an attractive way, meaning his wisdom and his intelligence was not off-putting. He had the kind of intelligence that the end of the chapter is going to describe this way. And the people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. They came because they were not just curious, but if we go back to Solomon's original motivation for asking for the wisdom, it was so he could be a blessing. And so over the next few chapters, we're going to see the way in which God blessed him, and the way, even though it's not specifically said, his wisdom is not only going to produce success, it's going to be attractive to people, because it's going to seem that they are likewise going to be able to see the way in which Solomon, even though he simply prayed to be a blessing to Israel, has now been made a blessing to the entire world, because he started off being able to overcome his insecurities through confession, not clutching them so tightly that they came out sideways in a way that was off-putting to those around him, but confessing his insecurities in a way, as we said, that prompted God not only to give him his request, and that was to be a blessing to Israel, but making this man a blessing to the entire world. As we see over the next few chapters, all the ways in which Solomon responded to his dad's challenge to prove to be a man.